pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1802 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. In this episode, Tracy Himes is going to finish telling us about the book she's writing titled War and Pennies, about her brother who served in the Vietnam War with the Blue Max, 2nd of the 20th ARA and the 1st Cav Division. That proves he was a good man. I ended the previous portion of this interview with a question for Tracy, and that is, did her brother send her pennies from Vietnam? She's going to begin this episode with the answer to that question. Without any further ado, Tracy, give us the answer to the question about, did your brother send you pennies from Vietnam?
I don't think he wrote about any pennies he sent me. He sent coins that he wrote about, but he never specifically called them pennies. I think he sent a pea. Wasn't there a giant pea that was one of the coins?
The name of them were piastres, but everybody called them peas.
Peas. So he sent us a 5-cent pea or whatever, and maybe some others, but he never really, I don't know if he did, I don't recall.
What's important there is not necessarily the type coin it was, but it was just a tradition of saying, I'm betting you these pennies, I'll be coming home, or these coins. Yes. He must have been a wonderful guy to come up with ideas like that and write those letters.
It's amazing to me that it's my brother. It's a voice I'd never recognized.
I can imagine going through all this. Tell us about the doors that have opened up to you as a result of writing this and researching and all the things you're going through.
Wow. Well, I've had the honor of meeting a lot of veterans that served with him in the crew chief tent, in the same unit. One of them has sent a Christmas card to Larry's wife every year since Vietnam, since Larry's passing. Every year, John Stewart from Pennsylvania has sent my sister-in-law a Christmas card, and she didn't even put two and two together until recently. She said, you might want to reach out to this guy, John. He sends me a card every year. And I'm like, what? And turns out John was like part of a big search and rescue when my brother was missing and shot down in the Happy Valley.
Missing? Tell me about this jet fighter pilot who saved him from the dramatic rescue in where's Happy Valley?
Happy Valley is not too far from Ashaw Valley.
Oh, it's just another one of those. But so what happened? Your brother went down?
Yeah, he was sent on a mission. 2 ships with 4 guys each were sent to the Ashaw to go on a mission on a Saturday morning, April 22nd, I believe it was, 1968. And there was terrible weather. They got shot in the air trying to help some troops on the ground, and they really tried hard to get out of the valley, and it was very difficult because of the low clouds and the high trees and the mountains. But they finally got out of the valley only to be completely lost. Their radios and GPS and whatever they used back then, it wasn't working because of the storms and the weather, and their ships just eventually ran out of fuel. One gunner that was with the crew of 8 told me that they got shot by the enemy on the ground as they were trying to land their helicopters. And so Larry wrote about it, and he said, you're not going to believe this, but I got shot down and I landed very softly. So they didn't crash. They managed, both helicopters landed softly in the Happy Valley, which was the Viet Cong's playground. They were surrounded by Viet Cong. There's a very long part of the story that they survive sleeping in the trees that night with all their provisions. They took everything they could off of those helicopters and went up into the mountains and tried to stay silent because the Viet Cong was closing in on them. And the next morning they got to the top of the hill. They got a C-130's commanding ship, picked up their signal, and that was an Air Force commander. He called in the jet fighters, which were Captain Tom Stroud was in charge of the mission, and his partner was Captain Lynn Oberdeer. Captain Stroud is alive and well and living in Texas and remembers it like it was yesterday. He told me every detail about it twice because I asked him to repeat it. He's collaborated a little bit on the book in that part of the story and those details because he went on, I think he said 40 missions in 1 year, and that was his very first search and rescue, and it was his most successful. He rescued all 8.
The jet pilot, he provided fire support for him?
Yes.
What did they do, send out some medevacs or something to pick him up?
They called the Jolly Green Giants.
Oh, yes, okay.
Yeah.
That's what picked him up, was one of those big Air Force helicopters?
Yes. They had to bring in 2 rounds of those, though. The first 2 got shot up by the enemy, and they had to pull out. And then they said, well, it's going to be 45 minutes before any more Jolly Greens can arrive. The pilot said, at that point, I really thought it was a lost cause because the only time a rescue really works is if you can get in and get out. They were not doing that. It took them hours to get through this rescue mission. It was very dramatic. And in the end, you'll love this part, the Jolly Greens had not yet gotten there. But all of a sudden, he hears 8 1st Cavalry helicopters from the Blue Max, 2 at a time, in tandem, in a row of 4, that came in and kicked ass in that valley and destroyed the enemy as much as they could. They let every one of those 48 rockets and all of those M16 shells go into that valley. And only one remained. The rest of them had to go back and refuel to landing zone Sharon, where they were staying, living, whatever. So the 1st Cav came in and kind of helped save the day, but it wasn't over. They weren't rescued yet. The second round of Jolly Greens came in, and then they were rescued.
Sounds like it'd be worth the book just to read that story.
Yeah.
I'm drained just listening to it because I can see what they went through. I was thinking in the first place, if 4 ARA guys from the Blue Max were down, the entire battalion would be out there, after them. And the CNC chopper would have probably gone in to pick them up. But anyway, I'm sure there'll be lots more details in the book. That's a reason right there to get this book. I can't wait for it to be published. There's something else I wanted to ask you. Now, there's a lot of other questions, but going through all this, and you're still going through it, what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned from this whole experience?
Wow, so many lessons. I've learned a lot about war and all that it comes with. I've learned that we should never fight a war with teenagers. I'm adamantly opposed to sending teenagers to battle, and I have a teenager who's going to be 17 this year, so it really hits home with all that's happening. I've also found that, unlike my brother, who never talked about Vietnam and healed from what happened to him there, veterans are starting to talk, and a lot of them haven't talked in 50 years, and some may never. But what I've learned in sharing these stories and talking about things that are a little tough that Larry wrote about, like his first kill and how much he liked that, which was hard to swallow, but he was, doing what he needed to do, and he was up in a helicopter. It was more like a video game for him in the beginning. It wasn't face-to-face. I learned that when I talked about those things from stages and veterans heard them, they then started to talk about the first time they killed, or how they came home and weren't welcomed, or how they lost their best friend right beside them. Things that are hard to talk about, but many of you had to endure. And I can see healing on their face as they're talking about it. It's painful, but it's very healing. And so one of the lessons I've learned is that you cannot bury your burdens, or they are going to bury you. And my brother is a pure example of that. He died somewhat of natural causes. It was a heart-related, probably from trauma, but he buried those burdens. And the reason I'm telling his story, was a very, very private man who would never have told his story and let me do this if he was alive. But I know that if he found that any of his buddies or fellow comrades from Vietnam found healing from his words, that he would give me his blessing. And that's why I'm doing it. Bring him honor, but also to help veterans talk about it, because our children need to learn about what happened in Vietnam, Mac. They don't know. I didn't know, and I know my son doesn't know. They need to learn from our mistakes. They need to know what the price of their freedom is. They need to understand that level of sacrifice, because they don't have a concept of that at all in this society. And it's going on, and people are fighting it every day. And it's an honor to be called a military family, just being a part, just having that in our family history. And so we need to preserve those memories and get them on paper.
Your book is going to do a good job about that, but I found out something you're doing. It is too cool for school. I can't believe it, because I have one of these things, and it is so wonderful. I want you to tell the listeners about this special offer you have for everybody. And I'm going to encourage you to take Tracy up on this and do it yourself. So tell us about your free ebook you're going to give to anybody who wants one.
Well, thank you. I'm really eager for people to follow this journey, because it's unfolding, and there's so much to it that I think soldiers will love about the journey as I'm getting to publication, which is going to be hopefully soon. In order to follow the journey, they just need to go to my website, warandpennies.com, Pennies. Don't spell it like my brother did, because he did not spell it right. When they do that, they'll not only follow the rest of the journey, but they'll get the book, which is called A Soldier Among Us. It's a journal for them to print out, talk to their family about. It's a series of prompts and questions that will just gather their memories and sort of commemorate their military service. Leave those important stories in a book, in print, so that they won't be lost. And so they can do that digitally or print it out. I'm going to have some made up in leather and be able to hopefully sell those one day or give those away. But in the meantime, an ebook is what we're able to do, and just a little something that I could do to try to get veterans talking again. And the journey, we talked a little bit about those doors that have opened. I mean, we didn't touch on a lot of them, but because of the situation in the country and around the world, we have had to cancel some events and some really cool things that were coming up so you can stay tuned for those and hear all about my amazing conversation and the pictures and stuff that I'm getting from Miss America 1967, who was the first Miss America to ever go into battle, into combat, to serve and to sing. And that's an incredible story in and of itself, that when you follow the journey, you're going to learn about that and some other doors that you spoke of. So.
It is going to be great. I can tell. I can't wait for it to come out. I'd also want to, again, mention this A Soldier Among Us free ebook. You don't even need to have to worry about how to spell the website, because there will be a link to that website on the show notes for this podcast episode number 1802. I have one of these, and I don't know how you did it, Tracy. Those questions you were asking were amazing, and how it would encourage you to go in and remember these things. And they weren't all bad. Many of them were good.
Right.
Some were funny. I'm asking everyone to go out there and get a copy of this and fill it out yourself. Who knows? You might become a writer. But, Tracy, I thank you so much for coming on here. And I believe earlier you promised that as this book gets closer to publication, you'll be willing to come back on here and tell us more about it, maybe even read us a few of these tremendous letters. Was that a true statement?
It absolutely is a promise I'd love to keep. I do. I'd love to read some of his words. You know, there's some favorite lines of mine. I'll just share one of them with you before we wrap up. You're gonna love this one. He said, "War is hell, but the girls over here sure are nice."
Oh, yes. That'll be an interesting line to bring us all back. We want to hear it.
There you go.
Thank you so much for coming on here and telling us about it. And I'm looking forward to you returning and telling us more about this book with some specific lines that were in there. In the meantime, this is almost an order. Every Vietnam veteran listening to this, I want you to go to the warandpennies.com website. The link will be on the podcast show notes. Download your copy of A Soldier Among Us and fill it out and be honest. It'll do some amazing things for you because they did it for me. And I am encouraging you to do it because I know it'll do you some good. Tracy, thank you so much for coming on here, and I can't wait until you return and tell us more about this tremendous book you're publishing called War and Pennies.
Thank you, Mac. Thank you for your service and for having me on today. It's been my honor.
It was our pleasure. Thank you so much. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1802 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for coming to listen to these stories. You are cordially invited to return again soon and often to listen to more that will be coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?